Hello and welcome to Education Scotland's The Pedagogy podcast. I'm your host, Bex Ewart, and I will be leading us through some really interesting conversations around about pedagogy with a really wide and broad spectrum of educational professionals, children and young people. This podcast came about as a response to the OECD report, which found that in order to improve the quality of outcomes for our children, practitioners and teachers need to be supported to explore their own pedagogy and their practice through a pedagogical lens. Unsurprisingly, in the early years, it's been a focus, and so there's a lot of research and policy documents and research papers around about the subject of pedagogy. But as we move through the school stages and into secondary school and further education, that reference to pedagogy drops off. We'll be talking to a whole host of educational professionals from the early years through primary, young children and people from various different stages in their education, and then right into further education, exploring pedagogy, what it means to different people, and what we might change and what we might challenge ourselves around to ensure that our education meets the needs of our children and young people as we move into an exciting but unknown future. We are very lucky to be joined by Professor Dr. Ger Graus. I'm not going to give too much of an introduction because I think it's better to come from him. But the one thing that I did find when I was doing a little bit of prep for this chat was somebody had described you as Jean-Jacques Rousseau meets Willy Wonka, which I quite enjoyed. So thank you very much for joining us, Ger. And I wonder if you could give us a bit of introduction, tell us a bit about your story and how you have found yourself where you are at the moment.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Yeah, the Willy Wonka Jean-Jacques Rousseau thing was Alex Beard, wasn't it, in his book Natural Born Learners, and it's because he'd visited me at Cadania, London, and we were talking about really about experience-based learning and the difference that makes, and that the fact that I've worked in over 40 countries globally, and wherever I go, I ask children, why do you go to school? And in about 80% of the cases, the answer is because I have to, which I think is really sad. And so Alex and I were talking about that and the role that experiences can play to answer that question better. And it's a bit like in a lesson, I often say to teachers, use the words, for example, every couple of minutes. Whenever you talk about an abstract, use for example, and the story that follows those two words will help to understand better and create an empathy around what you're teaching and what the young people are learning. So how did I get to where I am today? It's quite easy, really, with hindsight, because it's about, I've kind of discovered that there are no straight lines. And I had a column in a magazine called The Week Junior a wee while ago, and we interviewed some really interesting people, and we asked them 5 questions, and they were all, and the column was called Becoming Me. So I was less interested in where they were now, but I was really interested in the journey and why. And there were some amazing people. We had a heart transplant surgeon. She became a heart transplant surgeon because her daddy died when she was 12, and she didn't want other children's father to die, kind of thing. So some of that was really powerful. And the last question we asked all of the people was, can you draw as a line of your professional life? And the conclusion was that there are no straight lines. Yet when I set out 40 years ago teaching I came to England for 1 year, and look what's happened. And we were all told that they're straight lines, because what happens is you become a probationary teacher, as it was in those days, and I had to do 2 years because I had a foreign qualification. So that nonsense was around in those days as well. And then you become a second in department, and then you become a head of department, and then you become a senior teacher, and then you become a deputy head, and then you become a head. And in those days, then you go and work for the local authority. And so that was the straight line. And as I stumbled along, I kind of discovered that straight lines are not a good thing, really. So I started I came for 1 year. That was the intention. I started my teaching life at a new school called Taveram High School in Norwich. It was a brand new school. It was the best teaching experience of my life, because this wonderful head teacher, Mrs. Daines, had put together this collection of people who formed a team. And she was an extraordinarily gifted, I suppose, leader, experienced leader. She said to me on my very first day, just before I went to take the register for 3T, which was my first tutor group, she said on the way out, "Don't forget to enjoy yourself." I wonder how many teachers take the time these days to say that and to actually say those words. And so I started working with people who were extraordinary, who were gifted teachers, who liked children. That sounds like a very odd thing to say, but the key matter. And I was very fortunate. I'm really happy that you asked that question, because I left that school 5 years later, on the 31st of March 1988. And this week I spoke to Richard Taylor, who was the head of English at that school for the first time since 1988. And the only regret I have is that we weren't in touch much longer. And it felt like it was such a good conversation. And so it was one of the happiest events of 2023. It was a happy school. It was a brilliant school. And it was a school that allowed staff to do and use their expertise. The head teacher trusted us. And you know what? And when we made a mess of things, occasionally, as I certainly did, she'd then back you at the same time. So I was a languages teacher. I was a German teacher, which was a very odd thing to be in a country where everybody says, I don't know why we need to learn languages, because everybody speaks English, right? So that put a bit of a damper on proceedings, I suppose. And so I invented the reason. The school already had an exchange that had been set up by David Harding, who was the head of languages at the time. And I took on that exchange and made it bigger. And before too long, we had 15-year-olds going on 6 weeks work experience in Germany, staying in families who were asked not to speak English to them. When they came back after those 6 weeks, they needed no explanation as to why they were studying German or why they came to school. And that became a really important thing. The school, incidentally, also raised more money for Live Aid than any other school in the country. And it was a small school. We had 500 children. And I'm not saying that in a competitive spirit, but in a spirit of that was the ethos of the school that was created by that head teacher and those amazing people in it. She was also the head teacher who encouraged me to leave, because she didn't want me, quote unquote, to go stale. And I moved from a school in relative affluence with 500 children to a school in a very disadvantaged part of the north of England, in Hull, with nearly 2,500 children. And the experience, and I lasted 3 years. And I don't say that in any glib way. I didn't know the names of all the teachers. I knew the names of the clever children and the children in inverted commas at the bottom of the pile for whatever reason. And the mass in the middle just stayed grey. And it struck me as utterly bizarre. And it was the first proper realization that I had that actually we make very few educational decisions. We make economic decisions. And even in those days, after Hull School's reorganization, there were brilliant teachers in that school, but I didn't know them all. Mm-hmm. It was just all too big. And the term economies of scale was used a lot. Well, you know what? When it comes to children, economies of scale is the wrong terminology. And we really need to think that, why did the school in Norwich work? It worked not just because of its brilliant teachers, but because of its size and its community, where every member of staff knew the name of every child and knew something good about every child, right? And when you move to the big factory, you don't know every child, you know the good ones and you know the bad ones, and you don't know anybody in the middle. And because the place is so big, you also don't know a great deal as to what to do about it. But we also had exchanges in that school. I set those up because actually the realization that the children who come from disadvantaged backgrounds need this more. The more disadvantaged you are, the poorer you are, the more you need. It's logical. It's completely right that therefore that's where our efforts go. And regardless of the point, and I think people need to really get their head around this, regardless of the point of poverty, it's never the kid's fault. They don't choose to be poor. They don't choose to be in a disadvantaged area. So even if you are one of those who kind of so easily belittle people who find themselves in those circumstances, you can't argue against the fact that it's not the kid's fault. So that merits the effort. So I stuck with that. The rest of my life then stuck with the poor kids, really, because that so the straight line had gone, basically, boom, disappeared, and then the rest of it became a series of what I still think of as coincidences. So it was one of the largest languages faculties in the country. We had the Languages for All policy because that was the right thing to do anyway, but also the right thing, particularly for those youngsters. And so I was then asked whether I wanted to become languages advisor in the city of Manchester, which I did very happily. I again worked with brilliant people. That seems to be a common thread, right? I found the brilliant people. So Roy Jobson, who was chief education officer, later became chief education officer in Edinburgh, and David Johnston, who was deputy, gave us a license to do what we knew was right because we had the evidence. So I introduced languages into all primary schools in Manchester. We got European funding. Do you remember those days? Yeah. So we voted against our children. Anyway. We trained teachers. We set up links with cities in Bologna, Clermont-Ferrand. St. Petersburg link was already existing, Chemnitz and Alcalá outside Madrid. We trained the teachers. We worked with the consulates. We set up school links. And it worked, it worked. There was a buzz around the place. I plead guilty. I joined the dark side. But I became Anakin Skywalker again quite quickly. I think after that, David Johnston, my deputy CEO, became CEO in the neighbouring city of Salford, and I moved to Salford and became senior inspector, and had a brilliant time working with head teachers. At a time when we then we had the new government, the education government that did put its money where its mouth was, and particularly in inner cities. And all of a sudden we had this thing where with head teachers we could develop programs that worked for our young people. It was called Excellence in Cities, and I was in Salford in charge of this, and it was easy to be in charge of because I was surrounded by brilliant people, all right? So we made it work, and it became a bit of a leading light, I think. And then I was asked whether I wanted to become education director of the 2 education action zones eventually in Wythenshawe, South Manchester, next to Manchester Airport. And in many ways, that became the highlight of what I've done, because I knew Wythenshawe because of my engagement on the languages side of things in Manchester. I loved Wythenshawe. Wythenshawe, now also known as Marcus Rashford Land, as a proud place, Wythenshawe, that was disadvantaged. It was an odd place because it is a community of about 80,000 people. It was built at the time to when the slums in Manchester city centre were being knocked down. So it feels quite green and spacious, but it was deprived. It was disadvantaged. Yet it sat next to the fastest growing company outside London, i.e. Manchester Airport Group. And Manchester Airport was the lead organisation in the education action zones because it was an act of parliament. It was a partnership between education and the business. And the chief executive of Manchester Airport, Jeff Muirhead, the wonderful Jeff Muirhead, was my chair. So I had an office in Manchester Airport. And if you ever want to have an office in a place that has the potential to be aspirational, airports are good places to have an office, right? And so we worked very closely with lots of companies in the airport to make life better for those young people. And we invented all sorts of things, and we did wonderful business deals, and the community, in a small part because of us, was on the up. There were other initiatives, of course, like Short Start and the investment in health, which was so badly needed in that area. So I loved it. And then the highlight became when we taught Italian in a number of those primary schools. And again, the discussion was, well, what else can we do to make this meaningful? We have got this airport, we're on this doorstep. This is kind of the next bit. And I remember sitting on the way back home, stuck in traffic, thinking all of a sudden, how many Shakespeare plays are set in Italy? So I rang my good friend Julian Chenery, who's the founder of Shakespeare for Kids, and he went, it's 14, but there's 2 you can't do with small kids because they're too cruel. So I kind of went, okay, 12 is good. Can you give me 10 minutes per play, 5 minutes in Italian, 5 minutes in English? And he went, yes, of course we can. And then we started to audition, and we auditioned and practiced for a year. We rehearsed the drama as well as the language. And then we flew 50 children to Bologna to perform live in the Piazza Santo Stefano on Italian television in May 2004.
Wow.
And one of the reasons for doing it, I remember it really clearly, sitting in a meeting with John Gretton, who was then the head teacher at St. Anthony's. And when we were talking about the project, there was somebody quite senior in the council who said, you can't do that with these kids. So John and I just looked at each other and went, okay, we'll show you, shall we? And we did, and it was a really important moment. And then interesting, the whole thing was filmed. And about 4 years later, we got the money to kind of cut the film into something that we could show, the footage rather, into something that we could show. And I went to Allied Carpets and we got a red carpet, and in the Wythenshawe Forum, we had the premiere. And the girl who played Juliet said in the film, it was important for my life because I could prove to my family that I can do things. Because the aspirations of our youngsters, they're held down not by them, but by those around them. People from Wythenshawe don't fly planes. You get that all the time, don't you? And as I know, you have that in Scotland. So from then onwards, I then got approached to become the founding chief executive of the Children's University, which I loved because it was about kids learning out of school hours, particularly those from disadvantaged areas. And it was supported by a number of organizations, also by the government. And it kind of took off. So it moved to Scotland, for example. So I know that Helvin Grove and those wonderful places who joined us in that. And there is that wonderful photograph of a little girl called Becca who stands in front of a painting dancing with Anna Pavlova, who was in the painting. And mum sent me that at the time, Kirsty. So that worked, and again, evaluations. But then the issue, that was the next step really. The issue then was, well, if you actually engage solely in out of school hours learning and you claim that it matters, you have to do more than claim, you have to prove it. So there was a series of evaluations conducted by Cambridge University that was very clear about the impact of engagement in out of school hours experiences. And of course, the journey is never as simple as our politicians would like them to be, because we've got to remember that for politicians, everything has to succeed in 4 or 5 years, because otherwise they don't get re-elected. So we don't have a long-term view. So the outcome of the evaluation was not about they're getting better at maths or they're getting better at English or science or whatever, but actually the outcome was that the more you participate in out-of-school hours learning, but voluntarily, the more confident a learner you become. And you know that bring me a confident child and I'll give you whatever grade you want, really. The journey just takes longer. Yeah, so in our schooling system, in terms of knowing our children, the data we look for is the schooling data. Are they good attenders? Are they well behaved? Have they got free school meals? What are their projected grades? But we don't look at their aptitudes and their likes and dislikes and their confidences and whatever else. So all of a sudden, this Kidzania thing, I was sitting in Mexico City in head office and saying to the analysts, you know, when Kidzania is about cities built for children where they can find out about the world of work. And they've got like real aeroplanes in them and flight simulators and heart transplants and theatres and sports venues and television studios. There's about 60 activities in each one. And there are about 25 Kidzanias globally. They took a bit of a knock during COVID, so they're on the way back up. And when they come to Kidzania, they learn independently. So the grown-ups are meant to be out of the way. Teachers do that better than parents, incidentally. And the helicoptering thing used to drive me mad. But they get a bracelet when they come in, so they'll log into every activity. So technically, the Kidzania can track where they are, just in case they need to get hold of them. And then I said, well, what do we do with that data? And the answer was not very much, really. We report back to the sponsors as to how many children have been in their activity in a week. So I then said, well, I want to know what their first choice is when they come on a school visit.
Yep.
What's the first job they choose to do? So we took a global sample that now stands at just under 600,000 across about 8 or 9 countries. So nobody can argue about the size of the sample.
Yeah, for sure.
And so when we had the sample, the question became, well, who are those youngsters, right? Are they boys? Are they girls? Are they 4? Are they 14? Are they black? Are they white? Are they rich? Are they poor? Are they urban? Are they rural? Which country are they from?
Yeah.
And then the analysis kind of threw up that all stereotypes are set at the age of 4. So the pilot activity is 95% boys. The cabin crew activity is 90% girls. That's at the age of 4. Probably younger, but we haven't got the data. We haven't got the data to back that up. There's no change between 4 and 14. Big question about what goes on in schools, particularly in the STEM area. And the political answer that girls now outperform boys in STEM has got nothing to do with that, because that's test coaching. When they come to make the career choices, they revert back to stereotype. You know, the black girl from a poor area has never seen a black female pilot. How can she aspire to that? The role model doesn't exist. Then the finding that globally, almost all girls choose activities below the age range. So 9-year-old girls choose 7-year-olds activities. 9-year-old boys choose 9 or 10-year-olds activities. And that's to do with, yes, it's to do with self-esteem. Yes, it's to do with self-confidence. I think it's also to do with what we as adults project onto them.
Yeah.
Consciously or subconsciously.
Could I pick up on that? Because one of the things I've been scribbling notes as you've been talking, and kind of one of the key threads seems to be that where you've found those brilliant people, or where you've experienced really fantastic education, there seems to have been a common understanding about who and what children are, and the kind of values about what you believe about children. And that seems then to come through in terms of exactly what you were saying there, what we project onto children. So I think that would be quite useful to tease out a bit.
Yeah, so the final 2 findings, if I may, before I go into that. So the next one was that children can only aspire to what they know exists. So children from poor backgrounds will never choose the aeroplane as their first choice. Children from poor backgrounds will choose as their first choice working in the supermarket, or cleaning windows, or being a courier. And that's fine. And in the end, you know, I'm not bothered what their choice is at the end. I'm really not bothered. What I am bothered about is that they know that they had choices. Because we should stop interfering in the choices that they make. We just need to provide them with the platform to know what their choices are and how many there are. It's a different thing. The final finding was that globally, there's no difference in how the children choose. So between Mexico and Mumbai and Moscow, the way that children choose is the same. So there's an issue around the globalization of growing up. I don't know, TikTok, YouTube, whatever it is, that play, all shopping malls look the same, Amazon, And I think that we need to guard that. I think globalization in so many ways can be such a good thing, but it mustn't be to the detriment of our local, regional, or national identity. There's a balance to be had there, I think. I think the issue that you raise around children is, let's just look at what we do and forgive the generalization. So we have a government, whatever, and with some help, they decide what children should be taught, right? And then the schools become the places to do that, and the teachers become the people to do that. And then we measure through tests and inspections how well the schools and the teachers have delivered what the government want the children to be taught. So interestingly, you could have that discussion for a long time without actually mentioning the word child once. Because so what happens is, even through, and I'm sure that wasn't the intention, and I'm sure Andreas Schleicher, who I know well, would get very upset if he really thought that we serve the system. It's become self-fulfilling. We serve the system. We believe the league tables. This year, we've performed better than last year. This year, you had different children than last year. Let's just get contextualized. So if we actually work on the principle that we're meant to serve the children, and we put aside the systemic issues, then it becomes about how well do we know the child. And then go back to my old friend Ken Robinson, who always talked about the Industrial Revolution, the first Industrial Revolution, where we had mass schooling for mass employment. Your compatriot Billy Connolly put it in a different way. He would say that he went to school till the age of 14. I can't say the next bit.
Yeah.
And then he said, and then when I was 14, the school gates opened, and at the same time the shipyards gates opened, and we just went from one to the other. I joined the wrong queue and I became a welder. That's gone, right? So now we live in a personalized age, but we still mass school. So we need to get to know the children better. The information we have in terms of school data is not enough. And if you think of that data that I just talked about around Kidzania, how much does that tell us? And if you're now a teacher and think of that boys-girls thing, and I say to you, you've got 20 children in front of you, 10 boys, 10 girls. If you don't take note of what I've just told you, you are negligent. So we need better, wider, more information. And I'm doing some thinking globally at the moment with people around whether we can find the money to start something that I would call a global barometer of childhood that you produce every year, so that you report on the state of childhood. The global barometer, of course, should be segmented. And of course, Scotland should be a separate segment in that. And then we can learn our lessons. And we can learn our lessons meaningfully. So it's not unlike the PR company's Edelman's Global Trust Barometer, annual trust barometer. So we need to get to know the children better. So because the education and schooling of a child, two very different things. Incidentally, I can be well schooled but ill educated. Yeah.
But I think for me, what you're talking about, and the very fact that you think a global barometer of childhood is important, shows that you have a specific set of values around children as humans and beings rather than becomings.
Yeah.
And the role or the relationship, which I guess takes us almost onto that kind of the idea around about pedagogy and what it means to you. But that relationship, what is the relationship between an adult and a child, or an educator and a child, or a teacher and a learner? Because that seems to me the key theme that's come through what you've been talking about.
I think it is. I mean, pedagogy is an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, pedagogy is about teaching. It is the art, the science of teaching. So I'm Dutch by birth, and in the Dutch language, the word for teaching and the word for learning is the same word. I'm sure that's by coincidence. I don't think anybody ever clever 700 years ago sat down and said, I'll do that. But it is the same word. It is the word leren. I like it that it's the same word, because actually the educational process is one of co-responsibility. And I think we've kind of lost the plot a little bit on that, not least because of government, but also because of parents sometimes. Parents think, again, forgive the generalization, but some parents think that they can absolve their responsibilities. School will do that. And it's an odd thing because society feeds that. Drug education to school will do that, and sex education to school will do that, and knife crime education to school will do that. And at some point, somebody needs to turn around and go, whoa, are you going to come along then? You're going to give us a hand? Because actually, this is about values and principles. This is not about learning that the knife is sharp. It's about a behavior thing. And in order to get to the right point of behavior, this is a collective responsibility. My wife, who's a head teacher here in Sheffield, her mantra is every child is everyone's responsibility. And that is right and proper. So that's the bit, I think, where we need to take this. And we get confused, don't we? Because, I think we're obsessed with behavior management.
Mm-hmm.
And then but we don't quite define what we mean by behavior. And so actually what we then is we end up with a daft set of rules. And what we really should be talking about is respect, actually mutual respect.
Yeah.
And that's not easy, but then I don't think it was meant to be easy. I don't think anything was meant to be easy. So I think there are different things, and I would like that pedagogy piece is, so what role do you play as a parent? What role do you play as the child? What role do you play as the teacher? That role, incidentally, should change all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I increasingly think of teachers as two things now. Of course, the purveyor of knowledge, but also the project manager of a child's learning. And to connect with the real world. The teacher is the person who utters the words, for example, who hints and points towards purpose. And we need to think differently. We need to plan around the child. We are there to build different scaffolding around each child so that they can climb as high as they can or as they want to climb.
But for us to do that effectively, and trust is another thing that's come through, that level of trust that as the adult in the space, you have to have trust in the learners in front of you. And as you described with your first head teacher and with where you said you had a license to do what you knew was right. So it's the trust of the leadership who then support you to take those risks, because of where we sit within things in terms of collection of data, what we're measuring and how that's then used, we can become pushed towards a certain view of what a good teacher is. So a good teacher is if I have everybody in my class under control, behaving in a way that I have stipulated, doing the task that I have set, and sitting there and catching the bits of knowledge that I'm chucking out so that they go into their basket. And if I do that successfully, then I can be measured, and then they've learnt.
But trust is key, right? Trust is Carla Rinaldi. I'll come to her later. The president of Radio Children, the early years people in Northern Italy who are without peer, I think, in terms of their work. Her thing is around, we need to trust the children as much as they trust us. And trust is an issue. Government doesn't trust teachers. Teachers don't trust government. Senior management doesn't trust teachers. Teachers don't. So there's been a climate built, I think, of a lack of trust, and we absolutely need to get that back, because without it, nothing will happen. But also, I think we need to redefine. We need to be more courageous. But I absolutely think, and I learned, so I'm secondary trained, and secondary is incredibly, by the nature of the beast, incredibly compartmentalized, because you have people in charge of subjects, and then you have people in charge of year groups and whatever way it works. And I think, and I then, through my processes, was almost like an educational Benjamin Button. I kind of have worked my way backwards to early years. And I'm very fortunate to work with Carla Rinaldi and her colleagues at Reggio Emilia as an advisor. I don't know, I learned from them much more than and they can learn from me. But then you are about child focus, and you are about trust, and you are about it's okay to get it wrong, and then you are about learning processes that will have good outcomes. And if we really want to change what we do for the better, then we need to also measure differently, because then we need to measure what we value as opposed to what we're doing at the moment. And I think we need to ask ourselves a key question, all of us, and that is what education's for, what schooling is for. And going back to Ken Robinson and Billy Connolly, it is not just to feed the economy, it is to serve society. And that's a very different, of which incidentally the economy is a part, because without a functioning economy, your society would look very different by the nature of it. I think we need to move away from that stuff that only English and maths and science matters. What's been done to the arts and the humanities is unforgivable, because we've taken the people element out of school, out of learning. So I think we need to redress some of those balances, and also use institutions outside the schooling system. I mentioned museums and places earlier. So pedagogy for me is about education rather than schooling. It is about the recognition that the better schooled you are, the better equipped you are to educate yourself and to become part of a wider education process. But it is not just about from 5 to 16 or from 5 to 18. It is about much more than that, because once you are a confident learner, you will be a confident learner at the age of 99. So it is about those things that are about the whole life agenda. And it's interesting that Carlo Rinaldi now in Reggio Emilia talks about 0 to 99. It's not K to 12. It is 0 to 99. And that, in essence, is what it is. So the pedagogy is about enabling brilliant schooling so that we can become better educated and therefore make better choices.
The thing I think that's really particularly prescient about what you were just saying there, about the way that we've separated the subjects and that we've had this focus on the kind of procedural things of English and maths. Yeah. We're now in a really bizarre time where computer generated and computer learning can do all of that stuff far better than any human, and just like that. So when you're talking about, we have to be really clear about what we think the purpose of education is, it's almost like we have to go right back and go, what are humans brilliant at, and how can we support humans to flourish in a way that that makes the most of the skills that we don't need a computer for. And then there's that, because then we don't need the tension about people's, worrying about jobs getting lost, for example, to the AI sector, because they can do them like that, because we can start to look at the kinds of things that humans can do that AI can't.
Yeah, I think I've been promised that technology would make my life easier. It's the biggest lie, right? Because it was going to reduce my bureaucratic burden. I was going to have more time to spend with my children. None of that's happened. So let's just hope that this time we get that right, okay? And so we might come to a 4-day week soon. How brilliant, how amazing, right? Because actually all that AI generated wealth is not going to go to one person, but they're going to get so heavily taxed that it's going to get spread fairly, not evenly, fairly across societies. Therefore, we have a 4-day week to start with. How amazing. I have a slight worry that none of us will know what to do with the extra day, except for sit on our phones and look at Instagram or whatever else, right? So I think there are some educational processes around that. I think we also need to welcome technology. This is, I write with a fountain pen because I like it, right? And there we go, you see. But when the ballpoint pen came in, that was going to be the end of the world. right? And then when the calculator came in, oh my God, nobody was going to survive. In the book that I'm writing at the moment, I've already put in the acknowledgement Chat GPT, because it's such a good editor. So it is not what I've written that Chat GPT is written, but it's how I've written it that is better. So brilliant. I'm loving it. And the idea that I can actually bring dead people back into my history lessons and have conversations with Einstein at some point, or with Anne Frank, how amazing will that be? So I think we need to look at the huge good that will come out of there. And then we, of course, we need some form of AI police, army, whatever it is, to make sure that it's safe and it doesn't get abused. But we mustn't. It's a little bit like, you know, the behavior management in secondary schools in particular, taking over the quality of learning, of the learning experience, which I think happens sometimes. We mustn't let the danger of AI take away the excitement. I'm doing some work with a guy in the States at the moment. I had this idea. I wanted to invite 11 people for lunch into my favorite cafe. And they're all dead. All the 11 people are dead, but they're the people who I would like to have lunch with, and I would like to have that group together. So we're all going to the Café Florian in St. Mark's Square. Anne Frank is coming. Johan Cruyff is coming. Einstein is coming. Rosa Parks will be there. Umberto Eco is going to be there. Groucho Marx will be there. Mahatma Gandhi is going to be there. Oh my God, how could I forget? Archbishop Desmond Tutu will be there. And AI is at the moment producing the image.
Wow.
Right, but then AI will produce suggested discussion points, because it will research with these people. And eventually we might even be able to attach voices to it. I want to go to that history lesson several times a week.
Yes.
Right? That's the point, the excitement of it. So and think what that does to your creativity as a teacher. You know, again, going back to Ken Robinson, you know, we AI and its unlimited potential can make us creative again, rather than the follower of the dogma from the top down. So let's tell our teachers this, right? That excitement that's out there. How amazing. He produced, my friend in the States produced an image of Barack Obama sitting in Starbucks with Abraham Lincoln, and they're discussing the quality of their speeches. Take that to a history lesson or a politics lesson. Yeah. So we have to embrace this. And yes, we need to be aware of all the stuff that AI police can take care of. But we have, as teachers, as educators, we have a new set of brushes, we have new paint, and we have a blank canvas, and it's up to us. And we can get back to that 80%. You know, we can bring the answer that is, I go to school because I have to. We can bring that down to single figures if we get this right.
So I think there's something that I think we can link together in that. The kind of throwaway comment you made about if we had a 4-day week, would we know what to do with that 5th day, or would we just doom scroll? And then the idea that actually, if we are really purposeful and thoughtful around about how we use AI, it has the possibility to support creativity. And the idea that there's that sort of trust, and that going back to what your first head teacher told you, don't forget to enjoy yourself. So there's something for me around about rediscovering what it is to play, and really think about, actually, play isn't like Carl Rinaldi, play is 0 to 99 as well as learning. And so what does that look like? How do we as adults understand how we play? Is it, and do we have specific, perhaps cultural ideas attached to it? For example, that it's frivolous, or it's something to do when you finish the proper serious work. So I think, yeah, there's, I think, something around about that in terms of how you're discussing the shifting role of the teacher, but also the possibilities there. We need to have that permission to explore and play and find joy in what we're doing.
My favorite book is Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, The Little Prince. And it has a quote in it that says, all grown-ups were once children, but only few of them remember it. And they're the people who put the signs up that says no ball games. And they're the people who tell us that all these youngsters are so terribly badly behaved and they're constantly on their phone. And I do these sessions sometimes with teachers and also with parents where I say, when I was 14, I used to leave my mates behind. We used to cycle to school, used to leave them behind, get back home, put the bike against the wall, walk in, go and sit on the stairs, pick up the phone, which was attached to the wall, and ring the mates that I just left behind. What's the difference? It's not attached to the wall, and now I can see the people. So who am I to kind of stand on that moral high ground? I think we need to put ourselves into our youngsters' shoes. I think their lives are in equal measure unbelievably exciting and really quite difficult, because that coping with that social media thing, I don't think, I worry not about the social media per se, but I worry about the pace and whether we are emotionally equipped to deal with the pace rather than just with the product per se. And I think that's why you have this almost, forgive the word, but almost schizophrenic attitude that people have, where they're perfectly nice people face to face, but really quite horrid on social media sometimes. There are no role models yet in that sphere, really. So youngsters are grasping around, trying to look up to I don't know who and I don't know what. So I think all of that's kind of really tricky. But we also, and there's a brilliant sign. There's a small village in Cheshire called Kettleshew, and the residents put up a sign saying, "Drive slowly, old people playing." And the council took it down. So they were probably the people who'd forgotten what it was like to be a child. I think there are issues around because the conditioning that I talk about in terms of how schools are, there's also been a conditioning about how places of work are. And think of the trust thing, right? So during COVID, we all had to work from home, and then you had politicians shouting that people should go back to their offices because they couldn't be trusted. Literally, they couldn't be trusted to work from home. How dare they? And incidentally, it's also none of their business. It's the employers and the leaders issue. I know companies, one where my eldest daughter works at Edelman in London, who have managed this perfectly, really well actually, and they've done it in cooperation with all employees, and they've reached kind of compromises that means that they're more productive now and that everybody is happier. But you know what? That one word, trust. And I think throughout today, we will keep coming. The key words of the decade are trust and truth. Yeah. And both are lacking. And that's where we are. And I do think our youngsters' lives are immensely positive in many ways because the technology and everything else makes them global citizens in touch with people all over the place. Wonderful. And at the same time, there's a shift in that schooling and learning piece that is confusing. So if I'm 17, I go to school on a bus, I'm on my phone, I'm all over the world, I'm in touch with my friends in Madrid and in Mallorca, and I've just checked out Harry Styles, I finished the homework I should have done last night, I bought something on Amazon, whatever else it is. It's 9 o'clock, I walk through the school gate, I'm told to turn this off. And for the next 6 hours, any connection with the world out there that involves technology is like an old-fashioned library. I'm being told what to look for, how long I've got to look for it, that I've got to write down what I found, and I need to hand it in by the end of the hour. At 3 o'clock, I leave, and boom, this whole thing is there again. It's no wonder that some of our youngsters are a bit confused about the world they occupy, because there's this this wonder, awe and wonder bit out there, and then there is this restrictive bit that tells you that everything's bad. So we need to find the balance, and the balance needs to be better than it is. And that is for us as adults, in a sense, it's the same. I'm focusing on youngsters because they're going to be around longer to have to live with that, right? So there is that bit. We adults also, like the people of Kettleshume, we also need to play.
So we've talked about your discomfort with the term pedagogy and thinking more about that co-responsibility. You touched on the fact that you called yourself the Benjamin Button of education, that you started further with older children and you've worked your way back. So I guess in terms of who's inspired your thinking, Carla Rinaldi sounds like she would be one of the key influences for you. Who else has really inspired your thinking?
It's interesting. I mean, Carla is completely up there, but I think it's really important, as much as a person, as a professional. And I think the other thing that we need to think about very carefully, we're constantly being told not to mix the personal and the professional. I think it's the biggest mistake we can make, because we are who we are, and we carry that with us. Yeah. And sometimes we need to be a bit careful, but nevertheless. She's key influence, but I think, and that's also to do with that line very early on about there are no straight lines. Richard Taylor, who was the head of English, was a key influence. I saw somebody teach Shakespeare to 12-year-olds in a way where they couldn't get enough of it. Who wouldn't want to do that? So, I suppose that's my story. I've met so many people I wanted to be like, or at least a little bit. I wanted to take something, Mrs. Daines as their leader. Yeah, and from a very early age, as a boy, Johan Cruyff as a footballer. And incidentally, when Johan Cruyff was the manager of Barcelona Football Club, and when they walked out onto the Wembley turf for the 1992 Champions League final against Sampdoria, the only words he said to his players were, "Go and enjoy yourself," which is on his statue in the Nou Camp. But Richard and Paul Nevins, who was a teacher at the school, and then people I taught with at the school in Hull, and Roy Jobson and David Johnson, and my children who've been through that system, and you observed them, and my wife, who's a brilliant head teacher. So there are people everywhere. And I think that's really important, that we all acknowledge that it would be a very sad life if there was one person who's influenced you. I just think we need to look for it a bit better. And there are, I'm still in touch with some of my former pupils of 40 years ago. James Neal, who was my all-time favorite pupil. There, I've said it. We're not meant to have favorites.
No, we're not.
No, but I think that's a really daft thing to do. Because there's a trust thing in that. If I say that I had a favorite, by implication, it means that I've treated everybody else badly. That's a nonsense. So again, we just need to calm down about these things a little bit. And so everybody, I think, there are so many people, there are too many to mention. And I'm really glad that there are too many to mention, the people I work with in Italy. And then once I started working globally, if you see the people who work for a charity called Voice of Slum in Mumbai, how they bring educationally smiles to the faces of the poorest of the poor, you put that in your back pocket, and at some point you remind yourself, and it makes you better for being that. So I think we need to be more positive in general and more optimistic, but I think we need to look more for what influences us and why, and where that comes from. So I'm in that sense, to use a very old-fashioned term, I count myself as blessed, really.
There's something about your outlook, though, that I think invites those kinds of connections. But one of the things I think is really important to pick up on for me, and I think this is a key theme that's coming through in a lot of the work that I'm doing with educators at the moment, is that false distinction between the professional and the personal.
I wish for you that even more investment is made into the people, into the ongoing development of your teachers. I think, as an outsider, and forgive me, but I think that the curriculum for excellence could have been even more excellent had more time and effort been invested into the people who were due to deliver it. I've been around Northern Ireland and Wales, and particularly Scotland, for long enough to see a great deal of good. And it's I was in Scotland with Carla Rinaldi not that long ago. It was in September, doing some work with Education Scotland, and it's just a joy to be there.
So we've had a really full discussion, and we've kept coming back to these key themes of trust and that kind of courageous leadership. What is the key message that you want folk to take from this to inform their own practice?
I'll use my mantra because it makes sense, and that is, children can only aspire to what they know exists. That has to be your starting point in every single aspect. Build from the child. It came incidentally from talking to 6-7-year-olds at Manchester Airport many years ago, and I asked them the jobs that they could do at the airport, and the answer were the things they could see, which is about 45% of all the jobs at the airport, because the rest is backstage. And then right at the end, I would say to them, look, you can fly planes. And the answer I got was, more often than not, people from here don't fly planes. So if you build what you do from the child that you know, you have a real chance of getting them to places where they would never have ended up otherwise. And in the end, it is that Thomas Paine thing, isn't it? That the mind once enlightened cannot again become dark. And I think that's our job.
Perfect. So what's next for you personally, Ger? You mentioned you were writing a book.
So I'm writing this book. I always promised myself I'd never write a book. And then I was persuaded to, and it's going to be called, Through a Different Lens, Views with the Benefit of Hindsight. And incidentally, I think the benefit of hindsight is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's portrayed often as negative. I think it's a positive. And so it feels a little bit like what we've talked about for the last hour, and it's a bit of a professional autobiography. It's stories. I'm a great believer in stories. Don't read leadership and management books. Listen to the people around you and learn from them, because actually, if you work in inner city Glasgow, the stories the thing that is going to make the biggest difference to you are the stories of brilliant people around you, and pick that up. So that's the aim of the book. I don't know when it's going to get published, but we'll get there eventually. It's an interesting process, but it'll be the only one I'll ever write.
I mean, you say that, but yeah, let's see. So part of this conversation is, as well as kind of unpicking aspects of your brain, you also get to have 2 tunes that go onto our playlist that accompanies this series. So what are your 2 tunes and why?
That was really difficult. So one was really easy. Roberta Flack, The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face. Because it applies to everybody I love, basically, and that says it all. And it's beautiful. It's just incredibly beautiful. And then the other one I thought about for a great deal, and I've decided on a song called "All Aboard This Train" by Ruby Turner, because every year my wife and I try to go and see Jules Holland and his amazing bunch of musicians just before Christmas. It's become a part of our tradition, and the highlight every year is Ruby Turner. One, because her voice is quite incredible, and she's one of the people, as is Jules Holland, but she's one of the people where I sit and think, I wish I could do that. But then when she sings that track live, the whole place lifts. And that is something else that I wish, well, that's what we should all do as teachers, but that's what we, so out of admiration, I love her music. And I think, incidentally, if you are going to play them and you can find the live versions of both, the live versions are, in both cases, infinitely better than the original recorded ones. So,
okay, we'll get that sorted.
Amazing.
Thank you so much for your time, Ger. This has been a great conversation.
It's been, as always, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me. There are so many things that came up for me during that conversation with Ger that it's difficult to decide what to concentrate on to wrap up. But I think the key thing for me was about the aspiration aspect. You need to be able to see examples of things to aspire to, and then linked to that, the global data around about the tasks that children chose in the Kidzania opportunity, and how girls are consistently choosing tasks below their capability level and below their age level, while boys are not. So it just reinforces to me that real clear message that we have to be explicit about our beliefs, about children and about young people, and we have to understand how those beliefs inform the way we treat people, so that we aren't unintentionally reinforcing those biases and reinforcing those kind of beliefs about what's possible for children to be able to reach. If other thinking was sparked for you, please do let us know using the hashtag #ESPedagogyPodcast. And as ever, please get in touch if there's folk you want us to speak to. Look forward to speaking to you again soon. Bye.